Hello and welcome back to Kindled. I am your host, Haley Williams. I have a great episode for you today with Nicki Truesdell. She is a homeschool mom and now a book publisher, but she has so much knowledge and wisdom about homeschooling. She's someone who I've actually been learning from for years, even before I started homeschooling. And one of her articles was very influential in actually making me kind of getting my wheels turning, thinking about homeschooling. So I'm very excited to bring this conversation to you today. This is the second time actually that she's been on the podcast. Before we hit play on that discussion, I want to remind you to hit subscribe on the Apple Podcast app or wherever you're listening, as well as if you are on YouTube to subscribe there. So you will continue to get all of the new episodes in your feed. I hope you guys had a great Christmas break. I definitely did. It's been kind of hard and slow for me to come out of that break and get back into a routine and rhythm. Today was our first day of school back. And it's always refreshing and good, like once you remember, like, oh, I like the routine. It's helpful, it's good. It just helps everyone to kind of function a little better. I love breaks and vacations, but then you are ready to get back into, some sort of sense of normalcy. So I hope you guys had a great Christmas time with your family and friends, and it was restorative and just restful for everyone. I know we all need that. All right, that's all I have. So here is my conversation with Nicki Truesdell. Okay, so today on Kindle, I'm chatting with Nicki Truesdell. Nicki, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So I've had you on Kindled once before. It's good to have you back. Today we have a little bit of a different topic that we're going to dive into, Providential history. And I can't wait for that conversation. Actually, this is something that I've been wanting to learn more about, and you've kind of been helping me behind the scenes. But before we hop in, why don't you introduce yourself to listeners and tell them who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, I am a mother of five, and now I'm a grandmother of two. And our family has been in the homeschool movement for more than 40 years. My parents took me and my sister out of school in 1983 and homeschooled us. And then I've been homeschooling my kids because they're all spread out in age for 25 years. And I've still
Wow.
got two teenagers at home. Three have graduated now. And what I do is talk about homeschooling. I talk constantly about how you can, why you should, and all of that. And I've written two books on homeschooling, and my website is full of years and years and years of blog posts on the same topic. And the reason I'm on here today is also because I'm a history buff. And so I love diving into history, but not just history, but also going into original sources and learning the things that we haven't been taught in a very long time in this country. And so I publish out of print history books under my Knowledge Keepers company. And so I go back and forth all the time between homeschooling and history. And that's what I do.
I love that, and I have learned a lot from your podcast, actually. I am also becoming, I would say I'm at a stage of life where I'm becoming a history buff, realizing how much more history there is to learn that I, even with like my homeschool education and Christian education,
Hmm.
have gaps. We all do, and
Yeah.
or just want to learn more about a particular time period, want to actually dive deeper into that, and
Mhm.
and so you do a lot of good content, especially around America's founding. That's kind of a favorite topic of mine,
Me
and
too.
our Christian founding, and
Yeah.
I just I love how you bring in primary sources, and that's something that I've been kind of talking about on Instagram, especially is like we need to actually be looking what did the primary sources say? What did they
Yes.
write? Because so many history curriculums today are just a summary or a high level view and someone else's take on what they said.
Hmm.
And that's 1 degree or even 2 degrees sometimes of separation. The further we get away from that primary source, the less accurate we are going to have of a take, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I also think it's more boring that way.
Yeah.
When you read the stuff that was written down by the people who were there when it happened, it's so much more exciting. There's so many things that history books leave out because they don't have the time or the space. But besides even the fun little details about how people lived, there's so much left out about how much Americans loved God, worshiped God, and put God at the center of everything.
Mhm.
And that's why we have a whole generation, multiple generations of Americans who think History is neutral, education is neutral. This country was not founded on Christian principles. They believe that because they've been taught that deliberately. But if anybody would crack open an old book and read it and read the speeches and the letters and all of the different things that our founders said and wrote down, you'd get a much different picture than what the average history book teaches.
Mhm. Yep. And that kind of launches us right into the topic for today, which is providential history. So this is a new term for me, relatively new, one that I didn't really have a place for what this meant, or honestly, I didn't perceive that within maybe you could say like Christian circles that there could be more than one way to view history. So I have always been taught that like history is ultimately God's unfolding of his will, right? In
Mhm.
our world. And people have probably heard the little saying his story, it's
Yeah,
God's story, right? His story of the world. And I just kind of assumed all Christians like generally would agree with that. But it was recently that I saw something online. Of course, isn't that how all of our problems start? I saw
it is.
something on social media where I was confronted with an alternate view of what history is, and that it was um, what's the word that was used? Close-minded, maybe there was other descriptions given, but it was
Mhm.
very limiting and maybe narcissistic to view history in light of God's will being unfolded or God's, plan coming to fruition and God working things for his glory and Christians being looking at, the history, for instance, of America's founding as, like, God blessing this nation, clearly because our founders had these Christian ideas and embedded them in our Constitution, in our Bill of Rights, and that it is very centrist. It is centering yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of this language of Marxism, really, like,
Yep.
uh,
Absolutely.
yeah. So tell us more about that. Like, what are we looking at here with providential history?
Well, I first want to go back to when you said this is a new term for you. Even growing up in a Christian home and going to Christian school, same
Hmm.
for me. I grew up in a homeschool environment in a church. My parents were strong Christians. I never heard that term, but what I did get was a lot of the history that is based on that same concept, and that was the truth.
Hmm.
And so I grew up reading stories about all the founders, the Pilgrims, Columbus, all the way up to the Revolution and beyond that, and reading how strong they were in their Christian faith. Obviously, not every single American historic figure was a Christian, but the majority were, and not just in name only, but very strong in their beliefs and their practices in daily life. And so I grew up reading all those stories. And then when I, like you said, encountered people who didn't think that was true, I thought, well, why do they think that?
Hmm.
Because they were taught that. Most Americans are taught that God has not ever played a part in our history. But the proof is all in writing, and it's been there for hundreds of years. And so when you ask what is providential history, a lot of people will define it in slightly different ways, but for me, this is how I teach my kids and how I try to get this point across, and it's just seeing God's hand throughout history, and oh gosh, a lot of people call it like the golden thread. You can follow the golden thread of God's work in mankind all throughout history, from creation all the way to the present day. And instead of everything being random acts from, one country and one civilization to another, you start to look at the big picture of world history from a biblical perspective and from the Christian worldview perspective. And that's so much that's what's left out today. That's what's left out of public education for sure in the textbooks.
Hmm.
And, social media plays a big part in that now by pushing the narrative that God never, had anything to do with people and all of that. But even in education, even in books going back into the early 20th century, it's been deliberately removed so that people would begin to think that America, like everything else, is just a random happening
Hmm.
of disconnected events. But one of the things I really encourage people to do is to study history from the beginning in a chronological order from creation all the way through the present and see how things unfold and one thing affects another and another and another. And just like the United States of America, this did not happen in a vacuum.
Mhm.
I tell people all the time, I wrote this on my website, that the United States is the result of the Protestant Reformation. Protestant Reformation is the result of the printing press. And you
Mhm.
just keep going back further and you cannot disconnect all these events. And I think you can there's so many examples we could give, but when I get on X and I see that the British people do not have any freedom of speech today, that they can get arrested for just saying something online, I think,
Yeah.
wow, I'm so glad that America exists, and that we separated from the British government 250 years ago. It is connected. It's very important, and I believe that this is all part of God's plan. And I'm not saying that we're here to replace,
Mhm.
people get into all kinds of replacement theology and all that, but I believe that God gave this country to us, that he had his hand in it, and if you read the writings of the people that played parts in that, you would see it. It's so evident. It's hard
Mhm.
to ignore. That's my long answer.
Let me pause and tell you about one of my favorite sponsors, and that is Unsifted. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen me using their products in my baking and cooking, but this is fresh milled flour. Now, before you think that's just too crunchy or way over your head, I promise you it's not. If I can do it, you can do it. I have been using fresh milled flour for almost a year now, and I absolutely love having this as a tool in my family's health arsenal. And here's why: because unsifted fresh milled flour has 40 out of the 44 key essential nutrients and active enzymes that our bodies need to properly digest gluten and even function on a daily basis. So, you have heard that gluten is the bad guy in the bread, right? But it's actually not. It is the processing of the flour that makes the gluten difficult for our bodies to handle. But fresh milled flour contains all of the enzymes that are needed to process and digest the gluten properly. It's almost like the way that God made grain, it was actually intentional. But the Unsifted starter kit is the ultimate easy button for fresh flour baking, and it has everything you need: the high quality grain blends, easy to follow recipe cards, and the Wonder Mill, a super fast mill giving you a high quality flour in seconds. Go to unsifted.com to order your Unsifted starter kit today. Use code Kindled10 for $10 off your first order of $100 or more. That's code Kindled10 at unsifted.com. Yes. So, branching off of what you just said, if we were to give it like a definition, let's see if this is how you would characterize it. Providential history is the belief that a divine power, namely God, actively guides and controls the events of human history, directing it towards a specific purpose rather than it being random.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so you have to believe in God, and
Mhm.
you have to believe that everything he does is for a purpose.
Right. You have to believe that even holds within it a belief in God's sovereignty. And
Absolutely.
Romans 8:28, working all things together for, his own glory and for our good. And when I say "our," that would be the good of those who are called according to his purpose, so his own
Mhm.
children,
Mhm.
those who believe in him, who have repented and believed, right? And so there's a lot of, like, doctrine, even biblical truth embedded even in that definition, which I
Yes.
think is important to note. So, from this perspective, historical events, individuals, and nations are seen as part of a larger divine plan, with significant moments like discoveries or foundational events like the founding of America being interpreted as fulfillments of God's will. It is a God centered view that emphasizes hope and faith by seeing divine intervention in human affairs. Are we good so far?
Very good.
Okay. So, one might ask, what exactly is the problem with that? Because it kind of just sounds like you're espousing a Christian view of history that, of course, if God is sovereign, if God created this world, it's his world. If he created everyone in it, we are ultimately his creation. And Roman 9 talks about that. God has he is the potter, right? And we are the clay. And so if God sees that, for instance, he's going to allow Christianity to permeate the West in Europe and to flourish and to have these people come over on ships and find a new land and start a
Mhm.
country based on biblical values. Well, apparently that is God's sovereign will for how history has unfolded. Um, and we would look at that and just see God's providential goodness. That doesn't mean that we're saying any other country is less valuable or the people in it are less
Right.
valuable than American citizens, right?
Oh, not at all. We are all created in God's image, every single human on this earth.
Right.
So,
So how would you
no.
respond to the arguments of, well, that's American exceptionalism? You're basically saying that America is just this exceptional nation that is part of God's divine plan, and it centers all of like the world's history around America.
Well, I do believe America is exceptional, but I do not believe in centering all of the world's history around America. I just
Hmm.
believe that in a series of events, here we are right now, and
Hmm.
in all of the world, and I would say, yes, even in all of world history, America is one of the most exceptional places, and I would say even event, uh, that there has ever been we because of how our founding was set up, we have so many protections from, geographically, spiritually, legally, we have so many things that other countries don't have, and
Hmm.
all of that was as a result of all the things that our founders had learned from world history. So I would never say that. In fact, I don't believe in teaching American history in a vacuum. And I talk about this on my
Hmm.
blog in homeschooling, that you have to understand all of world history to understand American history, to understand how we got here and how our founders even thought the way that they did. They were students of world history, um, dedicated students. And so what they knew from the way men think and the way God is, all of that went into the founding that we have. It was such a unique event in history. And so yes, I do think America's exceptional, but it's because 100% because of the beliefs that these people that they lived, that they
Hmm.
practiced, and all of it was the Christian worldview. That's what makes it so very unique. Even though Western civilization has been largely Christian, whether it's before Protestant Reformation or after, yes, it's very
Hmm.
Christian. But the United States took it one step further and blended that with how to govern a nation.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, we're exceptional, and I'm not ashamed to
Hmm.
say it.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with you, on that for sure. One thing that I've come across in some of my research is, that some, I guess, when they talk about this, mean they believe America is, God's new chosen people in a sense of being like a new Israel, like his we
Mhm.
are the chosen people, we are the chosen nation, you know? And you'll see this a lot of times in like the hyper charismatic churches,
Yeah,
even when they talk about like an Esther generation, you are
yeah.
called to whatever, like partner with God to bring his kingdom here now, like kingdom now theology or seven mountain
Mhm,
mandate or some other
mhm.
kind of out there teachings. I don't think you or I adhere to any of that, right?
No, I don't believe that we are God's new chosen people. I still believe
Mhm.
Israel is God's chosen people. I mean, the Bible can be believed, every single bit
Mhm.
of it, and so I don't think we've replaced that. I just think that we have been given a unique gift
Mhm,
in the United
mhm.
States of America. That's what I see us
Yeah.
as. We've been given a gift. The whole world, the citizens of the world,
Mhm,
look
mhm,
to America as a place of refuge. Um, even though there's a lot of anti-American stuff out there, when you go around the world, the people who just live normal lives in countries under totalitarianism, they look to America
mhm,
because where else do they think, "Oh, I'm gonna go there and get my freedom. I'm gonna go there and be safe, or I'm gonna send my children there and be safe." And, regardless of our immigration policies and difficulties right now, there is a reason people come here, even though they will
mhm.
come here and say they hate this country.
Right.
They come here for a reason, and it's because we are unique and exceptional.
Mhm. Yes, and to that point, I certainly wasn't trying to corner you. The
Oh,
Israel
no.
being God's chosen people, faithful Christians can disagree on that. I actually believe, like, Israel is those who are in Christ ultimately, and so I wouldn't say, like, the modern state of Israel.
Mhm.
today is God's chosen people in my view, and yet what you're saying is that what makes America unique is not that we're saying because we had a Christian founding, we have now replaced whoever
Right.
Israel is. Whether you define Israel as a spiritual people or an ethnic people or some
Mhm.
combination, that is not what either of us are saying. We are
No.
saying that America is exceptional and unique because of its founding, because of what it was based on, because of the documents that were penned by men who were so much greater than us and so much more learned
Amen.
and, I mean, well read and had such a deep, understanding of truth and their faith drove everything they did. It would be rather insane to be sitting here, with enjoying the liberties that their founding secured for us while critiquing the fact that like, oh, but they weren't perfect or they weren't.
Right.
I mean, well, of course they weren't perfect. Nobody who thinks that? Who thinks they're perfect or sinless? Only
Right.
Jesus is sinless. But I mean, it is the very, genius behind their understanding of even natural law and scripture that allowed them to form a nation that affords you the right to criticize it, right? And not be
Yeah.
jailed. Like you get to sit there, on your phone and type whatever you want almost without being like you said, under totalitarian control
Mhm.
and be told that 2 plus 2 equals 5 and you must affirm this or else. Now, the modern state of our country is kind of shifting actually in more of that direction, right? As we've seen,
Yeah.
we're being told that yes, a man can become a woman, but that's a departing from the truths that
Yep.
that our founders held.
It is. Something that is so interesting, we talk about how wise and brilliant the founders were, and that's not an exaggeration, but that's the way people were educated. And, a lot of people like to look back and think, oh, they were primitive. They didn't know half the things we know. They knew more than we did. These guys, I'm writing a book on the history of education in America. And so a lot of the research shows that from the time of the Pilgrims, so we're going back to 1600s, they're founding little towns with huts, and
Mhm.
they still within 20 years of the Pilgrims landing, they were building colleges like Harvard. And
Wow.
and you started college at the age of 14, 13, 14, 15. And by the time you got there, you already knew your English grammar, your mathematics, your history, and you knew Latin and Greek and sometimes Hebrew.
Wow.
This is just to get into Harvard, and this is at the age of 14. And so
Mhm.
once they went to Harvard, then their goal was to expand on all of that. And I just think when people say those guys didn't know very much, I'm like, you don't even know what they didn't know. Like you
Mhm.
don't even know what they did know, much
Right.
less.
They've forgotten
It's
more than you've ever
amazing.
known.
It's awesome how much they learned. And so they could read the old text, just like I'm talking about, read the primary sources. They read all the ancient documents in their original languages and understood the meanings of words that we
Mhm.
don't even use anymore. And so, and of course, like I said, also their education was in the scriptures,
Yeah.
and I'm sure, hopefully, your audience has heard of how the Bible was turned into a catechism for reader. That's
Huh.
what the New England Primer was. It was a catechism turned into an ABC phonics book. This
Mhm.
is this is how the Puritans of New England taught their children to read at home with the scriptures. And in fact, Massachusetts passed a law in 1647 requiring the parents to make sure their children learned how to read. And it was called the Old Deluder Satan Act because they said that old deluder Satan will attempt to steal the minds and the hearts of our children
Mhm.
unless we teach them how to read the Bible. This is law. This is Massachusetts state law, and it was repeated many times over many colonies throughout the 16 and 1700s. And so they were grounded in the scriptures, and that's how it there came to be something called the Great Awakening in the 1700s. And if you look at the timing of the Great Awakening, which was just like a there wasn't a nation yet, but a
Mhm.
revival that spread around the colonies, all 13 colonies, for over 20 years. This is the time that George Washington was born and Benjamin Franklin was born, and a lot of our founders were born into this revival. And it's no accident that on the heels of that came the American Revolution, where they said our rights come from God. So
Mhm.
there's so much to the founding that goes all the way back to the Pilgrim settlement that is, again, like I just keep saying, it's missing in history education today, but it is rich and beautiful and it is all providential. Just like you
Mhm.
talked about, providential history is acknowledging the hand of God and living it and studying not only the events and the miracles that happened, but understanding how many people believed in God and their discoveries, their scientific inventions, their historic writings, their classic works, all of that stemmed from that.
The next sponsor I want to share with you is We Heart Nutrition. We Heart Nutrition is a pro-life, family-owned supplement company that makes premium, research-backed supplements for men and women at every life stage, from preconception to pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, and beyond. Every product is crafted with the most bioavailable forms of nutrients so you actually feel the difference. There are no watered down formulas, no unnecessary fillers, just wholesome, effective ingredients. Plus, they give 10% of every purchase to pregnancy resource centers to support moms and babies. I want to share with you something that someone asked me recently on Instagram was, girl, how do you not have postpartum hair loss after having your baby a year ago? I have not noticed your hair looking thin the way that it typically does. And I will tell you, I did lose a little bit of hair because obviously there's a huge hormonal dip after you have a baby. The biggest one a woman ever experiences, you're going to lose some hair. But this was the least amount of hair that I've ever lost in all 4 of my pregnancies. And I believe it's because I was taking throughout my pregnancy the We Heart Nutrition prenatals. And then after pregnancy, I transitioned immediately into the postnatal, which supports your body and really just gave me everything I needed as I was breastfeeding, getting less sleep. Nutrition is spotty in those early months, weeks, days. I am going to credit We Heart Nutrition because it's really the only thing that's different compared to my other pregnancies. I'm 5 years older than my last one. And so I have just seen the difference in my own health, my energy levels, and really I went in recently and had labs drawn, and all of my levels were great. Thyroid was fine, which I've had issues with that in the past. Everything was perfect, except my B was really high. Do you know why it was high? It's because I wasn't taking a We Heart Nutrition B. I was taking some other brand, and it's not bioavailable. So it was just building up in my system. And they told me, you got to stop taking the B. Like, that's what's giving you these headaches. High or low vitamin B can lead to that. I stopped, and the headaches have gone away. So that's just proof that the vitamins you take, the supplements you take, the quality matters so much. So go to weheartnutrition.com. Use code Kindled20 for 20% off your first order. Support your health and a family-owned company that supports life. Again, go to weheartnutrition.com and use code Kindled20 for 20% off. Mm-hmm. Yes. Which again just gets me back to this thought of like, how could someone who professes to be a Christian deny providential history, really, and not also be denying like a good chunk of scripture? And
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they can, but here's a quote from someone. This is just kind of random. This is not somebody with a big name, but something that I came across in some forums where women were discussing providential history and which curriculum teaches it and which one doesn't. And one lady said, in this one curriculum study guide, in their early American history primary study guide, it says in the sample, Columbus is another special individual God used in the discovery of America. Okay, pretty
Uh-oh.
vanilla. Pretty vanilla, right? That's like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, great. She says, I consider that providential history, though it may not be the extreme form of the America as God's chosen nation form. She says, there is no revelation from God telling me that God used Columbus or not, so I don't teach such assumptions. I don't know how much God interacts with the world directly today, so I won't attribute actions to him if I don't know for sure that he did them. I don't believe you can look at something and say, God did that, but God didn't do this over here. We just don't know, and I don't think we need to know. And she goes on and on, but Yeah, yikes. As far as whether God has used certain nations to do certain things, we cannot know that today. So I teach that things happened in history. I don't say whether God did or did not do them. If God hasn't told us which things he's done, it must not be important for us to know. Whew.
Well, wow, that's a
So
lot.
yeah, let's break that down there. I mean, there's no revelation from God telling me that God used Columbus or not. Well, what about Romans 8:28?
Yes. That's the thing, God allows humans to do what they want, and I know we may be getting into the
Mhm.
Calvinist argument here, but I am not a Calvinist, and I do believe that we have free will, and I believe that we make choices that affect small things and very large things, and
Mhm.
God allows these things to happen, but He's very forgiving, and He always makes room for repentance and for restoration, whether it's with you and your husband or your child or your church or a nation. World history. I mean, there's so many instances in world history where we can look at one event that happened and go, wow, if that had not happened, then this would not happen. Or,
Mhm.
if it had happened differently, then we would see a very different outcome. And I believe God may or may not say, okay, I'm going to stir the pot here and Columbus is going to go land here, but he allows it. And I just want to say, people might say there's no revelation from God, but Columbus believed that God led him to do this.
Mhm.
Columbus was very biblically literate, and he even wrote his own. He had a lot of writings on like biblical prophecy, and I wouldn't agree with everything that he concluded, but my point is the scriptures were not something that he left out of the equation. He was a Catholic. He was a devout Catholic. And I mean, because everybody was at this point. And
Mhm.
he said, I believe that God is telling me to do this. And, there were many facets involved in just what his decision to sail. It was
Mhm.
about, finding a new route to the Indies, obviously, because the Muslim pirates had blocked off the normal route, and so they needed to find a new way. It was also a way to give thanks to God for after Spain was freed from the Muslim stronghold. I mean, the
Mhm.
history of Islam is all over this too, and so
Mhm.
and that can be traced all the way back to the Old Testament, and so there's so many threads woven through history, but Columbus had many reasons. But if you read his journals, he says over and over, "I believe that God put it into my heart. This is what He told me I should do." And his goal, even though he did not, you know, bring it completely to fruition, was to share the gospel with whatever people they encountered, on whatever lands they were going to discover.
Mhm.
And the story of Columbus is a whole different topic, but that's just one example that there might just be special revelation, if that's what you wanna call it, because he said, "I believe God wanted me to do this."
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, clearly this woman doesn't even know if God actually is active in history, which kind of gives off more of like the deist view of
I was
like
gonna say that.
there's a higher power, there's a creator, but he may or may
Mhm.
not take an active role today in creation. I would be on the other end of that theological spectrum from
Yeah,
you with Calvinism, but regardless of that, whether you believe, and I would still, of course, say God is sovereign, but man is responsible. I,
right,
I don't believe we're robots. I don't believe that it's a robotic
right.
acting out of something that I have zero responsibility or culpability for, and
Mhm,
so
mhm,
regardless of your theological kind of where you fall on that debate, again, both of us acknowledge and assent to the reality that God is actively involved in his creation. He's sovereign over it. He has authority over it. He created it.
mhm,
And ultimately, history is coming to one final and ultimate conclusion. If we want to talk about history, it's not just what's happened, it's what's happening now and it's where things are
yeah,
headed, right? It's the end of
yep,
time. It's eschatology. And again,
mhm,
you could be a faithful Christian with a variety of views on the end times, but
mhm,
ultimately, because scripture speaks to these things, it speaks to time when, right? God exists outside of space
mhm,
and time. He created time, the universe. He created Genesis 1:1. We see where the earth that we live on today comes into existence. God is sovereign over all of these things. So how can we remove him from time marching on through his creation, which is all history is? How can we say, well, he's not providential over it. He's not
Yeah.
sovereign over it. He's not ultimately in control. To what degree you want to discuss he's in control or controlling things, we can talk about that. But if you're just going to flat out say he's not over his creation, he's not involved,
Mhm.
then I would just say you really do not have a biblical worldview. And that is not a
Yeah.
Christian view at all.
So if people don't believe that God is involved in the events of history or even today, then why would they even pray? How do you pray
Mm,
to a God that doesn't answer, that's not
mhm,
there, who's not listening? And so, um, yes, you're absolutely correct. This goes back to your worldview, and
mhm,
the parents need to have a very solid biblical worldview in order to pass that on to their children. And if you think that, like you said, the deist view, I don't know how you can even read actual history books. How can
mhm,
you read about people who prayed to God or, like Isaac Newton wrote profusely on the heavens and how there had to be a creator. This didn't just happen. He also wrote a lot about Bible. He wrote biblical commentary. Do they teach that in school? That Isaac Newton, the father of so many sciences, also wrote biblical commentary?
mm,
Those are very
mhm,
important. And I just want to bring up the deist comment too, because a lot of people will say our founding fathers were not Christians, they were deists.
mhm,
And deism is the belief, like you said, that God created the world and then he just stepped back and he has nothing to do with us anymore. But that's not what you'll find in the writings of our founders. In all of them who were Christians, they said there is a hand of providence. And that was an 18th century way of saying God did this.
mhm,
They spoke and wrote in different kinds of English, but that was their way of saying God is here. And you can't say the hand of providence was here if you don't believe that God actually is
mhm,
involved.
mm,
So I've not found a deist statement yet. And even Thomas Jefferson, who did not claim to be a Christian, actually did admit that he believed that God had his hand on America, that God um, is concerned about the affairs of men. That's not deism. So you just have to read what they said to know. Don't listen to TikTokers on history.
mhm,
Don't pick up a modern history book unless it's heavily footnoted with
mhm.
the original sources.
So I thought Thomas Jefferson, because I've heard, the Jeffersonian Bible myth and such, that he created this Bible without the miracles in order to remove, the kind of the divinity of Christ from the New Testament. But uh, what I read about that was that actually he was more so he created he never wanted it to be called a Bible. He didn't himself call it a Bible, but it was a document to actually reach the Native Americans,
Yes,
and he
that's
was
exactly
seeking to
right.
evangelize them. And so
So he
again,
made
like
it
these
something easy to read.
right, right, something
Yeah.
sort of like the right, the parables of Jesus, the stories of
Right.
Jesus or something. Like one might today, right? There's all kinds of books I have on my shelf about the parables of Jesus, and
Yeah.
these are for children who maybe can't handle, all of these deeper truths yet, or we're trying
Mhm.
to kind of give them bite-sized nuggets and stories just like the parables did. And Jesus knew that his disciples needed help understanding. All of that to say that I think there's a lot of these types of stories that exist that get repeated and recycled, and they
Mhm.
become mythology, really national mythology. And more than that, they're actually taught in public school history
Mhm.
curriculum, and even many,
Universities.
yes, universities. But now I'm seeing, this is the part that surprised me, was even homeschool curriculum
Yes.
is teaching these things that, again, all that serve this narrative that our founding was neutral. Our founders
Mhm.
were not trying to create a Christian nation. They wanted it to be religiously neutral. They didn't want one religion to take priority. And of course, we can kind of see where that's coming from today to dissuade any Christians who want to have impact at the political level or
Yeah.
have a quote unquote Christian nation that, well, you're just going against the founding because that's not what they wanted. A lot of these things contribute to that idea that, again, our founding was neutral, therefore our nation should be religiously neutral and sort of agnostic, right? That's
Yeah.
like what they want you to
That
think.
is what they want.
they that I we don't know what's true. We don't know, and there's no way to know, and our founders didn't know, and they just wanted all religions to be equal, right? And so, what would be your response to those types of claims?
Well, as I said, it's all written down. It's
Mhm,
very clear, repeatedly written down. Samuel Adams he's considered one like the father of the American Revolution. He was the founder of the Sons of Liberty that originated the Boston Tea Party. He wrote very clearly that freedom, American freedom is based in the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, he did
mhm,
not use the word providence. He said it very clearly. And many of the founders did the same thing. And so people can say, well, we don't know, or it was a neutral thing. Obviously, we have to recognize that America was a heavily Protestant Christian group of people in
mhm,
the 18th century. And so when they said religion, they weren't saying any and all religions would be okay. You have to understand the times in any history, any historic thing that you read, you have to go, okay, well, let me see what all was happening at the time and what were these people living and doing. And so the American colonies were heavily Protestant Christian. There were Catholic communities, there were pockets of Catholicism, but the majority was Protestant
mhm,
Christianity and a heavily Puritan from the English Puritans. But they wrote and they practiced and they set things up for that.
mhm,
Not to say that they preferred the Protestant Christian religion, but that is exactly what they were living, and that's what they based all their writings on. And so you can go through multiple documents like town charters, colony charters, like constitutions for colonies, and then state governments
mhm,
over and over and over and over and over and over and over, they say, "We believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ." They
mhm,
used the name Jesus Christ. They said often they said the Protestant religion or
right,
the Christian religion, the Bible. The words were very clear that all of this
mhm,
was heavily, heavily Protestant Christian. And so to say they were neutral is just a lie. If anybody says that, they're either
mhm,
stupid or they're lying to you. Um,
mhm.
and often when I hear people say that, I think, "You don't know anything, do you, dear?" You know, they
Yeah,
just don't know. They probably got it from some other influencer who got it from another
yes,
influencer, and people aren't
right,
reading.
right, they're just
Um,
regurgitating things they hear.
yeah, and so it's not that hard to know the truth, but don't Google it. Go get yourself a printed book. You know, you can order the writings of George Washington, the writings of Thomas Jefferson, the writings of Samuel Adams.
Mhm,
All these guys have their collections in print, and you can just go on Amazon and get them without
mhm,
someone's, cutting them into pieces and giving you just snippets
mhm,
here and there. And that's the
right.
important thing. And if you read it, you'll see that what I'm saying is absolutely true.
Yeah. This is where I just mourn again the loss of Charlie Kirk because he was so good at
Yeah. Oh,
communicating
he
these
was.
realities. Yeah, and I'm sure you've
You
seen
could
the
just
clip
rattle them
of
off.
yeah, of him going through, like, 13 out of 14 colonies, you had to be a Protestant Christian. There was
Yes.
only one where you could have Catholic faith even. Our founders were
Mhm.
hesitant about bringing in Catholics because they
Right.
had left, many of them, the Church of England, which was a
Mhm.
descendant of the Catholic Church, and they were really leaving for religious freedom. So, of
Yep.
course, they would want, the people in charge to hold their views. Now, the counter to that I always hear is like, "Yeah, but there's not that many mentions of God in the Declaration or in the Constitution, and yet I think Charlie pointed out there's, like, 4 distinct references to God
Mhm.
in the Constitution, and that is noteworthy. That is huge,
Mhm.
right? How many
Yes.
countries have been founded with reference to
Right.
the God of the Bible? And again, we should always seek to interpret things in the context in which they are, right?
Mhm.
So we don't just take the Constitution in a vacuum apart from the people who wrote it. We do what you're
Right.
saying. We first understand who are they? What did they believe? What was their view of man and God and history? And this is the document they produced. So in light of that, I can see that here's what they intended. Here's what they were hoping this would create. It certainly wouldn't have been an agnostic, all
Oh,
religions are
no.
created equal, we can't know what truth is type of democracy, quote unquote, like what we have today. That's just not what they intended to make. And
No.
so to say that that is what they intended is just, again, ignorant or stupid.
Mhm.
One or
Mhm.
the other. You have two options because you can't have read these things and come away with that as your final conclusion. It's just
Yeah.
I won't permit it. So,
I won't either.
and so let's get into the homeschool curriculum a little bit because this is what actually caused me to reach out to you about this topic was seeing that there are voices on social media who have maybe like a decent sized following and platform, and I can't even remember who they are now at this point, but there's accounts and thought leaders maybe in the
Mhm.
homeschool world. And now that I'm kind of, a couple years in, I'm starting to see more and more of them and be aware of
Yeah.
who's who and maybe who believes what, that are very anti-providential history, that speak that this is an unbiblical view or even an unchristian way to view history, that this is wrong and that we need to avoid this and will caution people against it, which just really blew my mind. So
Yeah.
for the sake of listeners, I mean, I think this is really important. Would you be willing to help us kind of at least get our bearings? I know you can't give a comprehensive list, but who and what curriculum companies and or individuals do we need to be looking out for this anti-providential history perspective?
Yeah, I wish I could take the time to make a comprehensive list because I think it's that important. But I'd have to study a lot of curriculum to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I've actually written a blog post about this because there were two that really stuck out to me in the last year or two, and so because they're very popular, I did write about them. One of them is, Susan Wise Bauer, who wrote Story of the World, hugely popular homeschool curriculum for world history. And I will say right up front that we used to use Story of the World when my kids were younger because it's cool. It's written as a story, all of world history in
Mhm.
chronological order. You just open it up and you're reading the story of history. And so
Mhm.
for that reason, I loved it. And it wasn't until I started following her social media, and I even recognized early on, like, that's weird. This is not lining up with what the Bible says about some of
Mhm.
these ancient history stories.
Mhm.
And I have a post where I talk about how the Bible is ancient history. It's also
Mhm.
poetry, it's also theology, but there is a
Mhm.
lot of ancient history in
Yeah.
there that archaeology has proven to be true.
Mhm.
Anyway, so Susan Wise Bauer does not believe that the Bible is a history book also.
Okay.
And she has said it online, and so I actually have documented that, I've got screenshots, but you can ask her. I mean, that's how I found it, was someone else asked her about the historicity of the Bible and the Old Testament. And so that's a huge red flag if someone who I mean, she says she's a Christian, um,
Mm.
she's a master of divinity, she's,
Mhm.
well educated, she was homeschooled, that's part of her story. But I think she's been so overeducated that she has
Mhm.
decided to walk away from biblical
Yep.
theology, and I'm not gonna judge her Christianity, but if you
Mhm.
can't accept the Bible to be true, that's a problem.
Right.
And so her curriculum does reflect that. The story of the world does not say that these events that happened during ancient history that come from the Bible are true, and so a lot of her ancient history just ignores the biblical part.
Hmm, and so what does
Um
that look like, give me an example of what that would be. I haven't seen this curriculum.
Well, so, the ancient history, there's so many big stories, the Egyptians is
Mhm.
fun history to study, ancient Egypt. I've always had fun doing that with my kids. But the Israelites in the Bible had a big role to play in that. They were
Mhm.
the slaves in Egypt. They potentially helped build the pyramids. We don't know that for sure. But Moses played a huge part in the history
Mhm.
of Egypt, and so did Joseph. And so you can actually go to archaeological websites. There's a lot of sites that do this. They verify the biblical accounts. The same thing with the Greeks and the Romans, the Israelites, the Jews, and then after they were taken into captivity, all of that, the
Mhm.
stories of Babylon, all of
Mhm.
that is huge world history. All of the battles and the different civilizations that fell and rose and were conquered by others. That's all cool stuff, and the Bible stories, the Old Testament stories of the kings and the prophets and all that was happening right inside of those stories,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
so that's the kinda stuff that gets left out of Story of the World,
hmm,
and I just wanna give a shout out to Mystery of History, which is what we use. She
yeah,
includes that, she shows
we
you
use that
how,
too.
like, the story I'm trying to remember the Battle of Thermopylae and the story of I think it's Esther, line up together, or
Mhm,
the Trojan War and the story of Ruth. Like, you pull out a timeline of world history, and all these things are coinciding. These were real people and events,
mhm,
and so I like that Mystery of History does that, and she shows you, um in fact, when you do the volume 1 set, you're just going from Bible story to other
yes,
ancient history, Bible story,
right,
ancient history, and I do this with my kids because I love history, and I just go, "Wow, isn't this so cool, guys? Look at this. All these Bible stories are part of these other bigger world history stories." Anyway, parents should be seeing that, if you're
mhm,
teaching your kids at home, you should know this stuff, and if you were never taught, like most of us, now's the time to learn
mhm,
it with your kids. Don't
yeah,
just put them in an online curriculum, but sit down with them and read the stories.
mhm,
Another example of this kind of homeschool curriculum is the homeschool historian, and I wrote about her too, so she knows how I feel. She I really was excited to see her kind of come into popularity because she's a history buff and she, makes people understand how important it is to know history. But then she put out a curriculum called Chronos, which is a chronological world history, and it's more like a here's this event that happened. Here are my suggestions for studying it and making it fun and all that, which is cool. That's the way I like to do it. But
mhm,
same thing, biblical history was kind of like basically her approach was neutral, which isn't possible, but that's what they call it, neutral history. And so she would send you to like a National Geographic website for different things. Well,
mhm,
National Geographic is anti-God. I'm sorry, but it
right,
just is.
right,
There's no biblical worldview. And so they're not going to tell you about all these cool connections between what happened in the Bible stories, Old and New Testament, and what happened in the real world. And so she and Susan Wise Bauer will both go on and warn people against Christian curriculum or, like you said, the Providential history curriculum. And they do it so vehemently that I try to stay out of online fights, but I had to get involved and just say, guys, why are you doing this? But I realized that their biblical worldview is not the biblical worldview that I would say a homeschool Christian parent needs to have. And that is that the scripture is authority. It is believable. Even if you don't understand it, even if you think that's wildly impossible, if you trust God's word to be absolutely true, then you can trust it to tell you accurate stories from history as well as all the
mhm.
other things that we use it for. So
It
those
looks
are a
like
couple.
the homeschool historian, just browsing her website, it looks like she's also a, master's degree in history holder.
Yeah. Yes, and that's one of the big things that she advertises is that's what I
Uh-huh.
am. And I
So
even
trust the experts, right?
right, right. And I told her, I was like, degrees don't impress me.
No.
You can read
Actually, they
a
make me skeptical instantly
yes,
when it comes to
especially when you
history.
make that your identity, like, "I've
Yeah.
got the degree."
Mhm.
Um, you can read a lot of books and be just as much of an expert as someone who went to college and read a lot of books.
Yeah.
So the degree does not impress me. In fact, it kinda scares me, like you said, because,
Mhm.
universities are inherently secular, Marxist, humanist, and unless you find the very small handful of colleges in this country, Christian colleges, you're
Mhm.
not gonna get a biblical worldview of even the Bible.
No.
Um,
And
Christian
most
colleges are
likely
dangerous now.
right, most likely what that really means is she is now reading history through the lens of critical theory,
Absolutely,
which
yes.
it sounds like from what she's doing. Like,
Well,
we
she
need
got
to
her degree over, like, from 2020 is when she finished it online, so absolutely, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
And it's good that you brought up critical theory because Susan Wise Bauer also is heavy into that. I saw
wow.
that, maybe before 2020, but definitely then because she's
Yeah.
very much into the feelings, the
Mm.
sympathy, all
Mhm.
of that, so
Right,
all of the things that
toxic
you've talked about.
empathy, yeah. I wanna tell you about our next sponsor, and that is Foundation Worldview. I absolutely love Foundation Worldview curriculum, and I use it with my own children in our homeschool. My girls and I, for the last year, have been slowly working our way through the comparative worldview curriculum, and I have been truly blown away by the advances and understanding that my girls have shown in their grasp on theology and even other worldviews. For instance, recently they were filling out a worldview map in one of the lessons, and my 9-year-old accurately described on her own with no help postmodernism, Islam, new spirituality, and naturalism. I don't know that I could have perfectly done that myself before this curriculum, but we've been doing it together and learning side by side. I am just so thankful that my girls at such a young age are getting an introduction to our worldview, which of course they're steeped in all the time through our homeschool, church, Bible reading, all of that, but then also comparing and contrasting that to what other people believe. It's giving them an awareness for the reality that our worldview is not the only one that is out there, and we have to learn to discern the difference between not just wrong and right, but right and almost right. I am so thankful for this curriculum. It has been a huge blessing in my life as a mom, and I know it's going to bless my girls for years and years to come, because they will look back on these days that they learned about other people's worldview, and when they encounter it in real life, it will not be the first time they've encountered it. I don't think we can stress how important it is that our children feel prepared and equipped for what they're going to face out in the real world. So that is the most honest review I could give you for Foundation Worldview. It is helping my own kids and is helping me feel equipped to teach them and train them. Learn more at foundationworldview.com and use code Kindled10 to get $10 off a family license of any Foundation Worldview curriculum. That's foundationworldview.com with code Kindled10 for $10 off. It's almost like you said. I mean, there are of course some exceptions to this, but
Mhm.
I don't I don't talk about realities based on the exception, but the rule. And the rule is that when you go to college for any of these things, really 98% of colleges today you're going to study whatever you study through the lens of critical theory,
Yep.
because the whole goal is to decenter not just yourself as potentially a American, but maybe also yourself as a white person or as
Mhm.
someone with privilege or as a
Yeah.
Christian. Every single thing that they can to knock you down a few rungs, right? In terms
Mhm.
of, hey, we can't put God's providence at the center of this story, because that would mean that the indigenous peoples of South America were less important than you, and that's
Mhm.
just not true. You need to. It's really flipping like Ordo Morris on its head, where you're not supposed to love some people more than others. It's
Right.
wrong. Does God do that? No. And so you're not allowed to have a special affinity for other Americans. You're not allowed to
Mhm.
have a special affinity for people of your own bloodline. Or if you
Mhm.
were, for instance, as I am a descendant of one of the founding fathers, like John Adams is somewhere in my line,
Oh,
I'm
that's
not allowed to
awesome.
have, yeah, it's so cool, but I'm not allowed to have any special affinity for that connection. I have to care as much about the person in South America as I do about my next door neighbor. Does that make any sense in the Christian worldview? Like, of course
No.
not. Of course not. I mean, yes, is the people of God spread all over the world? Praise the Lord. Yes, it is. And he's building for himself a kingdom of every tribe, tongue, and nation. However, he placed me in this one. And I have
Mhm.
specific neighbors and specific people in my city and in my state. And by the way, in my home, who I am called to care for above others. I can't equally care for
Absolutely.
everyone at the same time. And so, but you'll just see
Yeah.
that done over and over in university settings.
Well, another example I just had with my kids today, right before I came on here, we're studying the part of history that the 1700s. We are in the French and Indian War. We're reading about George Washington and his role in the French and Indian War. Also, that it was a bigger part of the 7 Years' War between England and France, and it just spilled over to the colonies. But as part of that, like I said, we read firsthand accounts, and so we're reading a story of, I don't know if you've heard of Mary Rowlandson,
Hmm.
but she was
Familiar.
kidnapped by Indians in 1652, I think, 1672. Anyway, and she survived, obviously, to write her story, but she told about how she was kidnapped. All of her family was, a bunch of people were murdered, and the treatment that she received, and it was brutal. And and then we watched a video about the Iroquois Nation, and and it was a good one, because they were talking about how the Iroquois, moved from one place to the next, and as they went, they conquered other tribes, they took
Mhm,
them as slaves, they killed them, whatever, and
mhm,
they took their land, and I paused and I said, "Remember this when you hear someone say that it's only the white Europeans that came
mhm,
here and did that, because
mhm.
the
Right.
Indians were doing it long before they ever heard of a white person.
The noble
It's called
savage myth,
sin,
right?
and
Yeah,
sin is worldwide, it's
yeah,
universal.
yeah.
And then I one of the books in my Knowledge Keeper series is about a missionary who he was a minister, went to live with the Iroquois for 30 years to preach the gospel to them. And people would say, "Oh, that's not right. You're imposing your white
Mhm,
religious beliefs or the
mhm,
European worldview."
mhm,
But no, that's the biblical worldview. We are supposed to
mhm,
spread the gospel, and if a nation doesn't know God and they obviously live in a lot of sin, that's what
mhm,
we're supposed to do. And so, anyway, there's so many different ways to teach providential history if you just
mhm.
think for a second and you
Yeah.
listen to the stories and you read the words and you go, what does God say? What does the Bible say? How do we live in, how do we read history? How do we
Mhm,
live in the time we're in and still follow God's ways? And yeah, critical theory will mess all of that up if you let it. And so you have to quit thinking in terms of
yeah,
race and all of that, but race, sex, religious beliefs and all of that stuff and just
mhm.
go everyone was
What is
created in
true?
God's image
Yeah.
and they
Well, and
deserve to hear the gospel.
some ideas are better than others. And so,
Yeah.
the Great Commission tells us to go and make disciples of the
Mhm.
nations, teaching them to obey all I have commanded. But through the lens of critical theory, that is colonizing. And so
Yes.
you're not allowed to
Okay,
even
then.
right, you're not even
Yeah.
allowed yes, then I believe in colonization, all right? Let's just get
Yeah,
that out
it's
there.
not a bad word. It's
It's
actually a good thing.
right. It's just truly ridiculous, but I think people have been so, browbeat to be so apologetic for our history because we have been told that it is racist and sexist
Mhm.
and misogynist and all of the things that nobody feels empowered to just say, yeah, that's simply not true, and you're clearly not coming from a biblical worldview. So
Right.
cool, you do you, but I completely reject your premise. I completely reject
Yes.
the premise that God is not engaged in history, that there aren't some worldviews that are more right than others, some beliefs that are more right, religions, and therefore some cultures. Our culture
Mhm.
is better than
Mhm.
yours.
It is.
Muslim country, it is.
Yep.
I'm sorry, not sorry. It is. And if you are afraid to say that as a Christian, you have been morally bludgeoned and you
Mhm.
need to
Mhm.
repent of fear of man, and probably get some better sources in your ears teaching you about our real history because I promise you when you learn about it, the last thing you should ultimately come away with is an overall sense of being sorry for what it is. That's just not
Yes.
that's just not right. And we can both celebrate that this nation um, was given the founders that it was by God, again,
Mhm.
providentially, and acknowledge that they certainly weren't perfect, and no country's
Yeah.
history will be. And so I just don't find it that hard or complicated to say both things.
No.
But when you start learning from these people, they will cloud and they will muddy the waters of clarity that you should have on these
Mhm.
topics.
Oh, yeah. Social media is awesome. Obviously, we're using it on a daily basis, but
Hmm.
it's also a train wreck, because people have a hard time discerning the truth.
Right.
What I tell parents all the time is be a bold homeschool parent. Be bold and be confident in what you're teaching your children and don't waver and don't
Hmm.
apologize. Just teach the truth and teach your children to be
Hmm.
bold about it because that's what we're lacking. That's why Charlie Kirk stood out because he was bold. He
Right.
was not apologetic about the truth, and
Hmm.
people were drawn to that. And we have to be that way. We've got to raise our kids the same way so that we can make a difference, whether we become a Charlie Kirk or just in our little corner of our little town, make a
Hmm.
difference and influence our kids to make a difference and maybe our neighbors and maybe someone at church, whatever
Hmm.
it is we're doing it starts with being bold and believing the truth and not being ashamed of the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it challenges you as a homeschool mom when you're teaching these things to your kid. And I came across this just a couple weeks ago and was talking, I can't remember what in our curriculum brought this conversation up, but we were talking about the founding and pilgrims and Indians and all of this. And it kind of, I guess it was Thanksgiving, that's what it was, and so we were talking about it, and even in my own, talking through some of the, I guess, the tensions, the reality that, everything wasn't, always perfect, that there were certainly, uh you know, that there was sin present in the people at the founding. There might have even been,
Yeah.
white Europeans who came over and took advantage of the Indians. Sure, of
Mhm.
course that
There
could have
were.
happened, of
Mhm.
course. Uh, and I saw the looks on my daughter's faces as I'm expressing this, and they instantly were like, they're thinking, "Oh, it's Thanksgiving, pilgrims and Indians have a meal together, it's great." And then they start hearing in whatever we were reading some of the maybe the darker side, of
Mhm.
that. And all of a sudden I could tell they're like, "Wait, so how am I supposed to feel? Am I supposed to now think, you know, America bad, and what are we celebrating even?"
Yeah.
And I just had to reaffirm, like, kind of what you said, like, every single nation has sin that blights its history.
Mhm.
And like you said, also, the Indian tribes that, if you paint it in the lens of, well, Indians were taken advantage of, or Indians were taken as slaves, or this or that, or whatever it may be, just understand that they were also doing that to each other. And they were also conquering and killing each other. They also did human sacrifice. They also slaughtered their children on altars to their false gods. They were
Mhm.
naturalists. They, believed that nature was God. They were idolaters. And so
Yes.
while you're thinking that the Christians, quote unquote, or the white man who came over was just this terrible thing for the land that we now live in, and we're literally in Kansas where Indian tribes ruled and reigned. And like,
Yeah.
while you're thinking that, understand there is another side to that conversation.
Mhm.
And you don't need to ultimately be ashamed of our founding. You can both acknowledge that God was clearly present in the founding of this country, and that there was sin that was wrought upon peoples of a all of them, really,
All of
all of
them.
them sinned against each other in
Mhm.
one way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah, and what I try to tell people too is history's not good and history's not bad. It's a story. It's a
Yeah.
lot of stories,
Mm.
and we surely can't judge them because, oh my goodness, look at America today. I mean, we
Right, right,
kill our
right,
babies before they're born.
right.
And I'm not saying you and I are doing that, but
Mhm.
this this time in America cannot judge other times in America. We've
Mm.
got such a mess going on here that we need to just I mean, that should make us look at it and go, "Oh, I see. Everyone's got problems.
Yeah.
Okay."
Yeah.
And as much as the Christians would want to solve all those problems, they haven't been able to solve all the problems of the world throughout history because people choose sin.
Mm.
And, the best we can do is, and this is what I tell people, even when this Christian nationalism talk comes up, I say,
Mhm.
the the really important thing is not to push Americanism, it's to push the gospel.
Yes.
And that's
Mhm.
what changes hearts, and that's what makes America great. That's what
Mhm.
made America great was a
Right.
strong foundation in the scriptures, not
Mhm.
an American nationalism. And
Mhm.
that's a whole other topic for another day, but really that's the thing. And just like people talk about slavery all the time, oh, the white man, the white Christians, the white founders had slaves. It was also Christians who pushed for the abolition of slavery.
Mhm.
And if
Right.
it wasn't for the Christians, we would probably still have it. Both in England and America, the Western world, it was the
Mhm.
Christians who stopped the slavery from happening.
Mhm.
And it's going to be the Christians who try to stop the other evils, who already are. But
Mhm.
it's Christianity spreading around the world that is
Mhm.
what pushes back evil.
Right. And what ultimately that gets at is that, back to that American exceptionalism conversation, what makes America exceptional is, to the degree that our founders were influenced by ultimate realities and God's biblical truth, that
Mhm.
is what makes it exceptional, right? Is not
Yes.
simply that they built beautiful buildings in a vacuum. No, they built beautiful buildings because they believed there was such a thing as beauty, as
Yes.
a actual measurable standard, because they believed in a creator who made beautiful things and gave us a standard to
Mhm.
pursue and, like, elevate our thinking, and they believe there was value in that. So it's not devoid of their worldview, it's actually completely embedded and downstream from their faith and their beliefs. And so, I think when the more that we get comfortable talking about explaining and expressing these things, the better of a job we can do teaching our kids those things. And I just love
Mhm.
what you said about being bold and not being ashamed. But
Yeah.
again, if you are feeling ashamed, that probably means you need to read some more history. That
Yes.
probably honestly just means you need to get off
Unfortunately,
Instagram.
you're gonna have to pick up some books and start
Right.
reading.
Right. So, Nikki, I know that you have a company where you are putting together really these primary sources for people and making them um, easy to purchase, to read, and to build a library. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called Knowledge Keepers Bookstore, and it started with me just, actually making book lists of recommendations that I thought, if everybody would read these books or if I would buy these and put them on the shelves, this
Hmm.
would be a great start. Because I also am a big believer in having a home library with printed copies so that,
Hmm.
you know, the tech world cannot change what you're reading. Um, and so I started with lists and then I would find books because I love to go book shopping at, used sales. And I would find things that I couldn't link to and recommend because they were out of print.
Hmm.
And I thought, man, these need to be brought back into print. These are so awesome. Then I figured out how to do self-publishing, and that's where that started. So now if I find a good book that I think is worthy of Americans today reading, then I publish it. And so you can see a couple of them behind me here, but I've got 21 books, I think, in the collection now. And usually what I do is find diaries, autobiographies, something where someone was there and they were writing it down.
Hmm.
Occasionally I've got a couple that are written by a secondhand person, but they are approved. Like
Hmm.
I have the whole set of George Washington's biographies written by John Marshall, who was the first Chief Justice of the United States. But he served under Washington in the Revolution. He knew the family personally, and the family gave all the papers over to John Marshall to write this down. That's the kind of books that I try to publish. And I have the Wright brothers story, and it is it's the only approved biography by the Wright brothers. And so that's the kind of stuff I'm trying to get out there so people can see the way people thought, the way they live. Some of them, like the Diary of a New York Girl, is just here's how people lived. Here's how
Hmm.
this girl who was, I think she was 10 or 12 when she
Wow.
started this diary, she still had in the 1800s, she's from a Puritan background. And it's so
Hmm.
cool to see how long that Puritan effect lasted. And so you just get to see the way this girl in upstate New York lived in the
Hmm.
1800s. And so there's a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Columbus's diaries, little girl diaries, slave autobiography, cowboy journal, as much as I can find, and I continue to print new ones all the time, but the goal is for people to read the stuff that, like, we're talking about, like, "Oh, here's
Hmm.
why they did that. Here's what they
Yeah.
thought when they did it, and here's what happened,"
Hmm.
instead of what people will say, like, "We believe this is what happened." You don't have to believe, you just go read
Yeah.
the book, so,
Right. Yeah,
anyway,
I love that.
it's called Knowledge Keepers Bookstore. That's the
Okay.
website name. All of the books are available on Amazon, and that's usually where I ship them from because it's easier for everyone.
Hmm.
So the links are on the website. And Knowledge Keepers Bookstore also has a Facebook and an Instagram of its own.
Okay. Perfect. Well, I'll link that in show notes for people. I plan on grabbing some of those for our home library. But yeah, I love that you brought up in a recent podcast episode that even our National Archives was talking about redoing. You'll have to remind me that they were like rewriting a history because it
With
was incorrect with
AI.
AI.
Yeah.
So, what in the
This was
world?
in 2021. I can't remember the name of the lady right now, but she was a very important role in the National Archives
Hmm.
in Washington, D.C., and she said that the basically all the records that are there are biased, and so we need to update them with AI. And that
What?
comment did not get near the attention it should have because that's
Insane.
scary. And that's why I say, technology changes things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why we've got to have books in print because I mean, we already know about
Right.
the internet is always changing, websites are
Hmm.
changing, but if the government is gonna let AI update what they think is biased resources, ugh, that
That's
just
terrible. Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, we definitely need to have primary sources, so that someone can say, "That ain't right." Right?
Yes, that's our
'Cause
job. Mhm.
right, we're there of they, quote, unquote, "the government" or whoever is rewriting history, and if they're doing it, well, you can bet on that these smaller entities like curriculum companies or Instagram
Mhm,
personalities who go and get MDivs and history degrees and try and sell you their programs are also doing that and are
mhm.
or even if they're not rewriting it, quote, unquote, in some sort of, sketchy AI way, they are viewing it through an unbiblical lens or approach to
Mhm.
history, which I just think ultimately as Christians at the end of the day, anything that the Bible speaks to, it has authority over, right? Which
Mhm.
is all of life. And so we don't get to remove God from the unfolding of history in the world he created. Like we just don't get to do
Absolutely.
that. And ultimately I would just encourage Christian parents who are listening to really just do your research on the history curriculum you use. If you are using one of these big survey books, you and I both use Mystery of History. I've liked that so far. But more than anything, I want to get my kids reading those primary sources, and as they get
Mhm.
older and their reading ability improves and gets higher and higher, I want them to be seeing for themselves what these people believed, what they said, how they lived. I think there's just there's so much benefit to be had from reading these books themselves and your website Knowledge Keepers is a great place to start for any homeschool parents that are listening and want to start building that library out.
Yeah, and I will say I've created a few free study guides with some of these books. I haven't with all 21, obviously, but I wanted parents to know, hey, if you've not ever used a book like this, here's how
Mhm.
you can do it with your kids. And the study guides are free to download, and they cover a wide range of ages with just thoughts and a few activities and things like that, so that you can
Mhm.
just pick up Columbus's journals and go, how do we use this in our homeschool? And they're all
Yeah.
designed to be used with any homeschool curriculum you have. So
Cool.
um, you don't have to have special tools to do it. Just add it in. It's that easy.
Yeah. Open the book, right, and begin.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Nikki. Where can people follow you online?
I am on X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all under my name, Nicki Truesdell. And of course, my website is full of information, and that's just nikkitruesdell.com.
Perfect. Thanks again for joining me today.
I love talking about this. Thanks for having me.
All right.